Hey everybody, it's Irene with BrainStormAcres, and today I'm doing something very simple that can make a big difference in your tomato preservation. Now what I'm doing this morning is I'm simply freezing tomatoes that are ripe because I simply don't have the time to process them right now. And if I were to try and take the time out of my already insane schedule right now, it wouldn't come out well. So I'm going to freeze up tomatoes, and then when it's cooler, you don't mind running the canning equipment and all that kind of stuff, I can process these things and have them ready to go. So nothing fancy about this. I have some paste tomatoes here that are starting to dehydrate. They're not spoiled. They're simply starting to dehydrate, so they've gotten a little bit wrinkly. That's okay. There were a couple of tomatoes here that I didn't like a piece of. So I cut off that piece, smelled it to make sure it still tastes good, and it's in there. And I have literally 3 buckets of tomatoes sitting on the floor here that I'm going to do a quick sort. Now, one of the things I recommend is that when you are harvesting tomatoes, unless you're harvesting just 1 or 2 and can keep them kind of flat and not piled on top of one another, remove the stems. Now, I know there are some people who don't believe in that, but I've been watching, I'll give credit to one of my favorite YouTube channels, and that's Veggie Boys. They're professional vegetable growers, and when they harvest their tomatoes, you can watch them take their thumb and do that and remove the stem. Now what that does for you is if I pile a whole bunch of these tomatoes in there, those stems can very well poke into the neighboring tomatoes and dramatically speed up rot. Now this is not a pretty tomato, so I'm going to set him aside for now. And I'm going to do a quick sort in here. These are mostly Hausenators. I did have a fairly flat environment in here, so I wasn't too worried about them getting stacked up. And I'm going to temporarily set them over on the counter here. I have a better plan for later today, but sometimes you have to do it in stages because your life is just a little too crazy. So all I'm doing is going through and grabbing tomatoes. Nothing wrong with this guy. None of our stuff is sprayed, so we don't have to worry about it. I want this guy to get a little bit riper. That guy too. I picked down harder the other day than I normally would have because we were concerned about a freeze, and we did get a freeze. The greenhouse did really well. The heater worked perfectly. But we didn't want to risk it completely just in case we got a freeze and, you know, lost stuff. Because if it's started to go orange, started to go orange or started to go red, we can always bring them inside and let them ripen just a little bit more. These are underripe. We try and do our stuff dead ripe when we're making sauce. So I'm going to stick these over here for now. And what I'm looking for is guys like this that are 100% ready to go. Bink. He just goes in there. I'm not going to worry if there's any green shoulders or anything. I'm just going to plop them in there. And this is the smallest of the buckets I have. It doesn't have much in it. Another reason I remove those stems is that once they're in there, I don't need them. The tomatoes are going to get mushy. That's what happens when you freeze tomatoes. And that doesn't matter because these tomatoes will grow up to be sauce. But if I leave the stems in, it's just one more thing I have to take care of when it's time to actually process them into sauce. And I just don't want to do that, so I'll do it now. Now I have a whole ton of Amanda orange in here. Some of these are not completely ripe, but I'm going to get them onto the counter. Like I say, they're going to go live someplace else later, but right now they're going on the counter just so I can get these sorted out. I harvested these the other day, just have not had the time to take care of it. I need to do a quick fix on these so that nothing's going to spoil, or if there's a tomato that's already spoiled that is not going to take, you know, the whole rest of the bucket with them. The old expression, one bad apple spoils the barrel. Well, that's what they're talking about. They're talking about a single spoiled fruit or vegetable getting in there and rotting the entire mess of good stuff just by dripping on them and stuff like that. Now I have a bunch of Invincibles in here, and I can see that those are ready to go. So plop these in here. I am looking them over for any rotten spots. Anything that was obviously not great, I didn't bring in. I went in the compost pile. But we don't really have a compost pile. We just have sort of a junk pile outside the greenhouse. We don't get enough vegetation here to compost well. We have no deciduous leaves other than from plants in the garden. And we don't really mow our lawn. We sort of weed whack it. So there is no source. We do not grow any animals other than dog and cats. So there we go. That's all I have to do. And I'm just going to continue this until I run out of tomatoes. And when I run out of tomatoes, I'm going to go out to the greenhouse and make sure I don't have any more sitting around out there, because it's been a couple of days and I'm watching them. I did harvest a couple of Amanda oranges yesterday that had gotten ripe enough that we could finish them in here, because I want to make sure I don't miss anybody. Because it's possible that the heater could fail, something else funky could happen, and I just don't want to risk it. These guys will all grow up to be tomato sauce, which is pretty cool. Both Henry and I are sensitive to tomato sauce that has green tomatoes in it. It gives us both indigestion, and that, in my personal belief, is the reason that why a lot of people get indigestion from tomato sauce, is that they are actually sensitive to green tomatoes and don't realize it. And of course, when you buy a nice jar of tomato sauce at the store, there's no way for you to magically look at this and know that it had green tomatoes in it. But I'll tell you what, we can both tell really quickly if something's had green tomatoes in it, because our stomachs will not be happy. So it's one of those little details that people forget to mention. And people say, well, why don't you make fried green tomatoes or something like that? First of all, I think I did have fried green tomatoes like a million years ago, back before I knew I was sensitive to green tomatoes. And I really did not care for the flavor that much. But on top of that, now that I know I can't eat green tomatoes, it would be totally silly for me to eat green tomatoes, because I would have the worst case of indigestion. And it just would not be worth it to me. I would much rather wait for these lovely tomatoes to get nice and ripe, and then they can become tomato sauce or chopped tomatoes or something that's actually useful for us. Yes, and it's not beneath me to eat little teeny tiny tomatoes like that. That's not even a cherry tomato. That's just a tomato that at some point didn't get enough water while it was growing up. Now, here's an excellent example of something that I will process further before I freeze it. This tomato has it's a hole in it. It doesn't look rotten. Certainly does not smell rotten. It's all firm, but I won't throw that into something like my bag. I'll wait till this is a little bit riper, and then I'll trim that off. It's just one of those things I do. to make the process a little bit easier when it's actually time to turn these mushy tomatoes that have been frozen into sauce. And my mushy tomatoes will go into a food mill. It's not the old-fashioned round food mill. It's a fancier tomato processing thing, but it's basically a food mill. It will remove all the seeds and it will remove the skins. I did not know such things existed when I first started making tomato sauce like a gazillion years ago. Eventually discovered actually the brand of tomato mill that we have. It's not just for tomatoes. It can be used for removing the seeds from any kind of fruit or anything else like that too. It has different size screens for raspberries and blackberries and stuff like that. Now I have a little pile of yellow tomatoes in here, and they're a different category. I have a little spot over here for them. But I want to be able to take these back out to the greenhouse. So I'm going to smush these over into storage, which is just a clean piece of counter right now. But later today should be somewhere else. So I just want to get this done, because done is sometimes high on the list. Let's see. Now, as I mentioned, this guy's not pretty. He split, and that was from variations in water. That smells good. Nothing wrong with him. So I'm just going to stick him in like that, and I'm going to cut off this whole section here that has the split part. It smells wonderful. Okay. I have another bucket of tomatoes that I need to sort. But I think before I do that, I'm going to go out to the greenhouse, and I'll take you guys with me, and we'll see how we're doing out there. I'll take the empty buckets out. These guys are going to go in the freezer.